Throughout the years, many newcomers have made attempts to dethrone the top video game companies of the time. Some have been successful, others not so much. Back in the early 90s, Nintendo and Sega were at the top of their game. Companies, most notably NEC with their TurboGrafx, would try to assimilate Nintendo and Sega's audience, taking a piece of the pie and grabbing some valuable market share. But the overwhelming weight of their resources and marketing would ensure their hold on the home console video game market and prove too much of a challenge for potential newcomers. Even when the odds were stacked against them, a little company known as SNK would decide to take on these gaming giants. SNK stands for Shin Nihon Kikaku, which in English means New Japan Project. SNK started out creating standalone arcade games back in 1978. The company would create some fairly popular titles, such as Vanguard, Ikari Warriors, TNK3, Guerrilla War, and POW. A notable feature of some SNK arcade games was the inclusion of an innovative 8-way rotary joystick. These joysticks not only allowed for movement up, down, left, and right, but they would also twist clockwise and counterclockwise for 360 degrees of control. With their successes in the arcades during the early 1980s, SNK would attempt to find new life with their games by porting them to various home computer systems. Their decision in 1985 to become a third-party developer for the NES would prove to be a profitable one. These 8-bit ports of some of their hit titles would go on to be just as popular as their arcade counterparts, and in some cases, even more so. With their games doing so well on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the company would go on to produce original content for the system in addition to porting their older arcade favorites. With the rampant success of their home console arcade ports, SNK decided to take a greater leap and follow in the footsteps of other arcade giants by entering into the home console market with their very own system. However, SNK knew that in order to compete with the powerhouses of Nintendo and Sega, they needed an ace up their sleeve. Something different, something special, something that would separate itself from the pack and give it an edge over its competition. This would lead SNK to take one of the most unique approaches toward the home market in video game history. First, in 1990, SNK would rock the arcade industry by releasing their Neo Geo Mvs Arcade Unit. This innovative device allowed for an arcade owner to have one machine containing various games that could be changed out with new titles at any time. Similar to Nintendo's PlayChoice 10 machine released 4 years earlier, instead of buying a whole new arcade machine, one would instead buy new game carts for the unit. From a financial standpoint, like the PlayChoice 10, this was an arcade owner's dream. Purchasing new carts for the system would usually be less than half the price of purchasing a whole new arcade machine. Also, having the one MVS unit would take up less of their valuable retail space. The MVS arcade machine was leagues more advanced than the PlayChoice 10 in every way, setting it apart from the aging Nintendo system. A variety of MVS units were released. Some supported just one game, while others supported 2, 4, or even 6 games in a single unit. The first 4 games released for the MVS were Nam 1975, Magician Lord, Baseball Stars Professional, and Top Players Golf. 1 year later, SNK released the Neo Geo Aes Home Console to the masses. The term AES comes from a subtext written on the system near the Neo Geo logo that reads Advanced Entertainment System. The system ran the exact same hardware as its MVS counterpart. This meant a person could get the same exact experience at home, bridging the gap between arcade games and home consoles. The system launched with a retail cost of $599, which at the time was the most expensive home console anyone had ever seen. Not only was the console price high, but the AES games cost upwards of $200 per game. Because of its price tags, not many people could afford the system. But like most things in life, you got what you paid for. The Neo Geo was released during a time when the biggest and best technology didn't necessarily make it the most popular choice. The gaming industry was still considered a market aimed at children, and the Neo Geo was definitely not a children's toy. The Neo Geo AES was a serious piece of equipment, and it was marketed as such. It was a highly stylized and sleek design, and it was only available for sale at specialty locations or through direct order. Everything from the jet black professional look to the gigantic cartridges separated this system from the more toy-like systems of the time. The system boasted a processor running at 12 MHz, about 3 times as fast as the Super Nintendo. Neo Geo had 65,536 colors available, with 4,096 available on screen at a single time. The SNES had about half as many colors, with only 256 on screen at a time. The Neo Geo could have 380 on-screen sprites, while the SNES 128 only. The Super Nintendo was slightly better in the area of sound, but when comparing these two, Neo Geo's capabilities dwarf Nintendo's flagship system. The system was marketed as a 24-bit system, more than double of what was being offered at the time. In reality, though, it was an 8, 16, and 32-bit microprocessor unit. Another unique feature of the system was its cartridges. In the world of the NES, SNES, and Genesis, most gamers were used to cartridges that were generally small, but when it came to the Neo Geo, the cartridges for the system were quite large. In comparison, about 2 SNES carts equal the size of one MVS cart. Not to mention, the carts actually had 2 PCB boards inside of them, rather than one that was common in most of the home console cartridges. This was due to larger memory capacity and in some cases, additional hardware. While some consoles like the SNES were touting their games had 32 megabits of memory, most Neo Geo titles were 40 megabits and above, with their largest games weighing in at over 700 megabits in size. This was totally unheard of at the time. Because of the larger cart sizes, the costs of the games were substantially more expensive. This led to a higher cost passed on to the consumer. One new feature that had never been seen before was the inclusion of a memory card. With this slot, a user could transfer their save game between the AES to the MVS unit. This concept would later be revisited by Nintendo, as a similar concept was used in such arcade games as NFL Blitz 99, allowing you to transfer your playbook to the arcade, and even F-Zero AX, which would unlock cars in the arcade for use in the GameCube version. When you played a Neo Geo AES game, you knew you were playing something different, something special. Something that in all honesty seemed like a dream, as you were playing a system that in a world of Super Mario Bros. 3 for the NES and Altered Beast on the Genesis, it simply felt light years ahead of what should be expected for the time. Some of the games for the Neo Geo system have the most breathtaking two-dimensional graphics you'll ever see. The attention to detail and art style of these games have stood for years as the most advanced and well-crafted, even by today's standards. Yes, the system is mostly popular for its fighting games, and it is a dream system for fans of this genre. With that being said, the system does have its share of shoot-'em-ups, sports, and action games that are also quite awesome. Between 1990 and 2004, SNK would make some of the most unique and entertaining titles ever to be released. Yes, that's correct. We said 2004. The Neo Geo AES system lived for 14 years, with the last game released being Samurai Showdown 5 Special, making it a system with one of the longest lifespans in video game history. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Let's take a step back and look at some video of the iconic games released throughout the years for the Neo Geo. SNK still needed to diversify their interests. They continued their third-party relationship with other home console companies by releasing games on various platforms like the SNES and Genesis. With CD technology becoming more popular and cost-effective, SNK set out to make their Neo Geo system and its games more affordable to the gaming public. The result was the release of the Neo Geo Cd. The Neo Geo Cd was capable of running the exact same games as the original AES, but on a compact disc, rather than the large, expensive cartridges the AES used. The system debuted in 1994 for the price of $300, with game prices starting at $50. Besides the price and the controllers included with the system, the unit was pretty much the same as the AES. While the library of games for the machine were primarily ports of some of the MVS and AES games, there were a few exclusive games not released on either the MVS or AES. Most notably Cross Swords 2 and Shinshetsu Samurai Spirits Bushido Retsuden. The unit also received a number of MVS game ports the AES unit never received, such as Puzzle Bobble and Power Spike 2. Even with the system being more affordable, it was unable to obtain a strong following. With the advent of 3D home console gaming, with systems such as the PlayStation and Saturn, interest in the Neo Geo CD system was scarce. The Achilles heel of the Neo Geo CD was the horrible load times. The source of the problem was a single-speed CD drive. Some games took almost a minute just to load up to the initial start screen. Not to mention the load times from level to level. SNK attempted to correct this issue by releasing a new model, the CDZ, in Japan. The unit was indeed faster, but load times were still on the long side. All these contributing factors led to the eventual demise of the Neo Geo CD. Even though the company was still supporting the MVS unit, SNK decided to take the Neo Geo brand to the 3D realm with their arcade unit dubbed the Hyper Neo Geo 64, released in 1997. The Neo Geo Hyper 64 was SNK's attempt to gain more ground in the 3D arcade industry. Only a few games were released for the system, most notably Fatal Fury Wild Ambition and Samurai Showdown 64. The system was a miserable failure. Unlike the MVS, the Hyper 64 had no third-party support whatsoever. It was also very costly upon release, and most arcades just weren't interested in purchasing it. The system never became anywhere near as popular as the MVS unit, and it was killed off by 1999. The 3D arcade Hyper Neo Geo 64 unit would quickly be forgotten, but some titles such as Samurai Showdown 64, Warrior Rage, and Fatal Fury Wild Ambition were eventually ported to the PlayStation 1. The Neo Geo Pocket was SNK's attempt to gain a piece of the portable gaming pie. Many had tried to dethrone Game Boy, some with minor success, while others just failed completely. Even with the Game Boy's aging hardware, it was still able to outsell more advanced hardware due to its huge library of hit titles. The Neo Geo Pocket was originally very similar to the Game Boy, as it used a monochromatic screen and it only had two main fire buttons. One difference was the unit had a mechanical thumbstick rather than a directional crossbar, almost like a miniature joystick. While the unit's graphics were similar to later generation Game Boy titles, it was capable of doing more advanced animations than Nintendo's Game Boy. Later, the system would get a color upgrade with the Neo Geo Pocket Color system. The system was also similar to its Nintendo counterpart, the Game Boy Color. While SNK had its own popular titles, they knew that in order to succeed, they needed an edge over the Game Boy, besides just being a technologically advanced system. Instead of simply porting its library of Neo Geo titles over to the new handheld, the company would release original titles as well as spin-offs of its more popular Neo Geo games, such as SNK vs. Capcom, Match of the Millennium, Metal Slug First and Second Mission, and Fatal Fury First Contact. The system also featured the ability to link to the Dreamcast for a few supported games, such as King of Fighters 99, and a wireless link for another handful of titles. For the most part, the games for the system were great. Even so, the system never quite caught on. It's a shame as the unit was very entertaining. Because of poor sales, SNK began gutting their overstock of games and removing the cartridges in order to release them into blister multi-packs. This had made it more difficult to find these games complete in box. As the years went by, SNK would see its shares of ups and downs. While the Neo Geo was a success in the arcades, the AES unit never became truly mainstream. It never became a major contender in the 16-bit wars, and its aging hardware would eventually be overshadowed by the new 32 and 64-bit systems of the late 1990s. With sales of both Neo Geo and Neo Geo Pocket games continuing to fall, SNK closed its American offices in the summer of 2000. The company was then purchased by Aruze, a company known for its pachinko machines who used some of SNK's properties in their titles. It was during this time period when Capcom vs. SNK was released. The game was highly successful, however most of the game's profits would go to Capcom. In 2001, due to lack of revenue, some of the SNK intellectual properties went up for bidding, and some of its franchises were licensed out to other companies. Seeing the value in the SNK brand name and its properties, Playmore, a company started by the original creator of SNK, Eikichi Kawasaki, would purchase the rights to the company and its holdings. Playmore would then change its name to SNK Playmore. Neo Geo collecting can get fairly expensive. Complete AES games go for prices anywhere from $30 to $3,000. Even though the arcade MVS games were actually more expensive at the time of their initial release, in general, MVS carts are drastically less expensive now. This is due to the fact that more MVS carts were produced than AES carts. The arcade MVS unit was pretty popular and widespread. Rarely would you go to an arcade and not see one. However, the AES market was fairly niche. As stated before, not many people were able to afford the AES or the games. Because of this, the number of AES carts produced was fairly low. For an example of the price difference between the MVS and AES version of a game, we will take a look at Metal Slug. Metal Slug was a fairly popular title on the MVS. However, the quantity made for the AES unit was very low. A complete Metal Slug MVS kit can go for approximately $70, while a complete AES version goes for approximately $2,000. This is an extreme case, but it goes to show the difference between the two versions. AES games were released in large plastic cases that were slightly larger than the system carts. For the most part, you would receive an insert in the case, a graphic label on the cart, as well as a manual. MVS carts were released in kits. These kits contained the cartridge in a plain brown box with the name of the game printed on the spine of the box. This label would also have a printed serial number on it that matches the serial number printed on the spine of the cart. Other than the spine label, there was no other way to identify the game from the cart. Also included in the kit would be mini marquees for the games that were placed in the marquee display of the arcade machine. An instruction card and other promotional materials were also included. Since the hardware in the AES and the MVS units are nearly identical to one another, one could technically play MVS carts on their AES unit with the use of the Super MVS Converter 2 adapter. This opens up a cheaper option to Neo Geo collectors to expand their collection. Some MVS owners have even gone so far as to consoleize their arcade machines. A consoleized MVS is an MVS motherboard modified to be played on a TV. The Neo Geo will always be remembered as an innovative and groundbreaking piece of hardware. While SNK is no longer a hardware manufacturer, ironically enough, they still produce games for other systems, just like they did in the days of the NES. They continue to move forward with sequels to their classic games in the arcade, with titles such as King of Fighters 12, a game that is true to the SNK brand. It's the first King of Fighters to redraw every character in higher resolution and better animation. Every frame of animation in the game is hand-drawn and it looks awesome. The company has also attempted to delve into the 3D realm yet again, with games such as Metal Slug 3D for the PlayStation 2 and the multi-platform release King of Fighters Maximum Impact, both of which have received mixed reviews. Knowing their fans are die-hard 2D gamers, the company continued to release 2D games on various present-day platforms like the arcade game King of Fighters 11 for the PS2 and Metal Slug 7 for the Nintendo DS. Not to forget their Neo Geo titles, the company has also released a variety of compilation discs on the PS2, the Nintendo Wii, and even some standalone titles on the Virtual Console and Xbox Live. These collections and downloads, while not always perfect ports of the originals, are perfect for anyone wanting to replay these games or even try them out for the first time, as they are great ports and they don't carry the hefty price tag of the original cartridges. Now a whole new generation of gamers can rediscover the goodness of SNK. While the company never quite saw the success or recognition as companies like Sega, Nintendo, or even Sony, there is no denying the company's impact and mark on the history of video games. With the company still producing and releasing games, gamers can look forward to even more great accomplishments by SNK.